Actually, I'm going to give it a class. Well, both. First, we'll give it an ID. I'm going to call this big text. And then I'll give it a class here in just a minute. But first, before I can add some images over here on the left, I have to make this small enough for them to fit next to. So I'm going to go target big text. And I'm going to make the width maybe well, I'm going to go and do it the same as I did up here, which was 50%. And actually, I want to give it a border at the bottom as well. Well, I'll do that later. So, okay, so we got that width 50%. Now we have some space where we could add some images in here. So let's go ahead and add another article. I'm going to call this article, I'm going to give it an ID and call it gallery. And I'm going to go ahead and insert 3 or 4 images in here. Okay, I'm inserting these images. And to save time, I'm going to add just a hash as the alt to remind me to come back and give the description later. All right, there's one. And beforehand, I went into Photoshop and actually made these all the same size. So it's a lot easier to do that than to try and get them all the same size with the code. Much, much easier. So I'm going to go ahead and insert 3 more. Okay, and so for right now, they're all in this section, but remember images are inline elements, so they are sitting next to each other because they fit, but I actually want them to stack on top of each other. So I'm going to go ahead and tell them to float. Actually, I'm not going to do that. Let's first go ahead and get this whole section up over here, and then they'll start to stack on top of each other just from that alone. Okay, so I'm going to target this ID over in CSS. And I went ahead with 30%. And okay, let's move them up next to each other, which means we need to float both the big text and the gallery. I'm going to do that with these classes that I already created down here, however, so that it kind of matches. So I just need to go and give those classes to each of these. So here's the text. The text I want to actually float. What do I want this to float? I want this to float right. And I broke something. Let me jump over here and see what I broke. Oh, that's the ID. Sorry about that. To give it a class. There we go. Okay, and now I want these images to float right, or excuse me, float left, but that class will also give them some space on the side as well. So here's my article down here. I'm going to go ahead and give it a class equal to float left. And you can see they're kind of maneuvering outside of this bar because now that I've floated these things, I need to contain those floats. I already have the micro clear fix on my CSS. I just need to give a class of CF to their parent. So this section right here is the parent. So I will give it a class of CF. And that puts them back down where they should be. And one last thing I want to do is go ahead and add another little white line like this, all the way down here. And then I'll add some space between each of these images. So let me go ahead and go over to CSS. Here's my big text. I'm going to go ahead and give it a border on the left of 1 pix. And then I'll also give it some padding on the left. And I want it the same as above. I think that was 10 pix. Let me make sure. It's actually 40 pix. So let me go down here. Okay, that looks pretty good. Oops. And I think it'll look good with the white line here above that section too. I haven't given that section a ID yet, so I'm going to go back over to my index. Here it has a class, and let me see if I actually made a class for that. That's okay, we'll give it an ID. So this section I'm going to call it more text. Now I can target that. All right, so I added that border and some padding to the top. That looks pretty good. And then I just want to add some margin between each of these images. So I'm going to go ahead and create a class for that. I'm going to create the class first. And I'm going to add margin bottom. I'll start with 10 pixels. I might want to change that later. So I've made the class, but I haven't given it to these images. So I'm going to go over here, find those images. Here we go. Give them a class. Forgot what I called that class. Image margin. I'm going to give that to each of them here. And I have a lot of more room to work with. So I gave that class a margin on the bottom of 10 pixels. I'm going to go ahead and up that to 20 pixels. Actually, maybe even 25. And that fills that up, I think, quite nicely. That's fine. Okay, so I have a good amount of content. I have at least 4 paragraphs. I've got at least 6 images. I've actually got 8. I've added in a quote. Actually, maybe I'll go ahead and add one more quote. Down here at the bottom. So I'm going to add one more section before the main closes. I'm going to go ahead and go in here and add a paragraph. Give it that class of quote.